Welcome back to Eleum Loyce. We're just about done exploring this place, but there's still quite a bit to do. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it before, I don't think I have, but I do really like the graphical effect here when you roll around in the snow and get sort of a pleasant dusting of it on yourself. Very nice looking game. Just in general. Cave physics are second to none, more or less. Cutting through the city after you've unfrozen it can be a bit of a chore, simply because now there are so many extra enemies you need to deal with. Enemies who have absolutely no regard for what you're doing. I have been in situations where I've simply gotten into a ridiculous backstab chain. In fact, I think something similar might have gotten caught on camera in Room Tower. Not necessarily the backstab chain, but when I tried to kill that Ashen Idol and the Creeper Invader just decided... not the Creeper, that's Minecraft. The Prowler Invader decided to come up and just stab me in the back while I was doing that. That was cool. Somewhat unforgiving iframes in this game. No amount of adaptability will help you there. Sadly, aside from the presence of retainers, or that is to say the presence of hostile retainers, there's not much new out and about on the grounds. These chests, however, are also unfrozen. However, we must be mindful that one of them is a mimic. It's pretty easy to tell, actually. For whatever reason, the coloration of the last mimic chest is much different than the ones that have been frozen in ice here. Might be a trick of the lighting or something. As you can see, it's much paler. Some very nice loot here. I can't help but feel that this clashes a little. I much prefer the contrast between the dark Drakeblood armor and the bright yellow turban. Well, I guess it's a turban. It's a turban taken to the logical extreme. So we skipped down this way before because we couldn't see these guys. Now, however, we can find a much more even footing. I say that, though they do have a nasty trick in store. They are completely and perfectly capable of operating those ballistas. So if you end up in a situation where you end up in front of this one, this rude lord will quite frankly be more than happy to just stab you in the face with a ballista bolt. Like we were some sort of pursuer. I actually did not know that that guy could drop night leggings. I mean, it's completely useless since you get some of those like 5 minutes into the game, but I guess if you end up throwing those away for some reason... There's actually a lockstone switch here. Hiding Durgo's hat. Durgo's hat is a unique piece of headwear that will increase the effective range of your arrows. When combined with the hawk ring, you can actually get a pretty appreciable increase in how far you can shoot while not suffering too much damage fall off. It also looks pretty cool, but it's not quite on brand. It's quite a few Elizabeth mushrooms. I'm not sure what they needed with all of those. The new area for today is down this way. Previously, this entire wing of the castle, well, the ramparts, I guess, was completely sealed off by ice, but now that the winds have stopped, we can actually explore this area. We actually pop by over that first little overview looking at the dogs, and we end up inside of the walls. It's actually a pretty nice find. Since most of our catalysts are not heavily upgraded, a +8 is actually... I will take that gladly. Most of the miracles and spells that I use don't really scale that well with upgrades, because they're usually heals or just utility things. But nothing is cheaper than free. There's nothing particularly special about the inside of the ramparts. There's your usual assortment of ice soldiers. The architecture is in significantly worse repair here than others. Most of Eleum Loyce is fairly intact, all things considered. A couple of bridges we needed to plug in with snowballs notwithstanding. More mushrooms. Not sure I've ever used one of those things. And a bit of a shortcut. Not much of one, but a bit. If you needed to get here from the bonfire, I guess it would be shorter this way? Maybe? Yeah, it would be. Fairly significantly. Yes, the classic note combination. Illusory wall ahead, liar ahead. Now, we certainly could do that, and I briefly consider it, but instead I decide to take a safer route after giving it some more thought. The reason being, of course, is that there's no reason to do that because the ladder takes you to the exact same spot. With the added bonus of simply being able to deal with this guy however you see fit instead of getting sandwiched. Oh, that's nice. The Rampart Golem Lance is a unique lance. It also does magic damage as well as the usual physical. However, it's extremely heavy and it takes 35 strength, I think, to wield. Let's take a look. Yeah, 35, 20 dexterity. Pretty heavy investment. We could potentially two-hand it if we wanted, but now is not really the area to test out new weapons, to be perfectly honest. The Ring of Resistance is actually a new find entirely. You can get the vanilla version by talking to Cromwell the Pardoner with your faith above 25, I think? I would have to check that, actually. But it's one of those NPC give you things. It has a fairly steep faith requirement, though, so not a lot of people will actually see it outside of the upgraded version, which you can just find on a corpse here. As one might expect from a Ring of Resistances, it upgrades your resistance to all negative status effects by quite a bit. It's a little late in the game to really be useful, but I guess if you wanted to, you could make a beeline here and get it early-ish. I mean, you still have to unlock Dranglake Castle, so... And at that point, most of the poison and stuff is gone. Still, it can be useful in PvP, if you just want to have all of your bases covered. And there are, definitely, certain enemies that will inflict bleed and poison still. They're much less ubiquitous, but they are still here. Now, the note that we saw saying parrying ahead is actually quite right, just not the kind of parrying you might think. What we want is the ability to deflect spells, because there's going to be a powerful opponent up ahead. And an arena pretty much tailor-made to make life miserable for us. Another shortcut, this time back down where we found the Eye of the Priestess. And we are invaded by Dark Spirit Castaway Witch Donna. In a vacuum, Donna would not be a very difficult foe to face. She's not much different from Peculiar Kindler, who we fought in the Shrine of Amana. However, much like in the Shrine of Amana, the terrain is very much not in our favor here. She will continually use long-range spells that are quite potent, especially the Crystal Soul Spear that she likes to use. And she will also hide behind this Rampart Golem for protection. So, simply bum rushing and closing the distance is not necessarily your best bet here. Especially when that can happen. I'm okay. No problem. MLG. Basically, the thing about closing the distance with her is that it doesn't always help. Her Crystal Soul Spears come out ridiculously fast. And somebody forgot that healing in this game is not instantaneous. Let's try again. This is how you properly fight her at close range. It's honestly much easier when you don't fuck up colossally. Who knew, huh? We find another Loyce Knight here. He also seeks the chaos, and I'm going to follow his lead and not only seek the chaos, but homeward bone out. I wonder if those are standard issue in the Eleum Loyce army or something. Just carry around some bones. Intimidate your enemies. At about this point, I deeply resent the level designers for not putting in a ladder here, and instead have to take the long way around to our next destination. You may recall this door from the first video, which was sort of hidden behind this winding path, and marked by these 4 braziers we can... braziers. These 4 braziers we can light. I should just call them standing torches or something. Now that the storm has ceased, we can light a torch without issue and in turn light the standing ones. Doing this will open the door. Most ominous door it is. Behind that door is probably one of the more obvious secret doors in the game. And a pathway up to where all these retainers are slouching around, as well as the Bone Fist, a very special item. I might actually show it off a bit later, but it's not really something that this build would get much use out of. Now, by taking this path, we find ourselves in a situation where all the retainers sort of aggro from the other side and then file in one by one and drop down on you, making for what could be a fairly threatening mob if you let them get out of hand and behind you, into a fairly manageable one-on-one encounter, multiplied by 8 or so. Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't know why all of these retainers were locked in here, why it's designed the way it is, why there's a Bone Fist, or literally anything. In a fairly well-designed area for this game, this particular storage cavern, I guess, feels kind of video gamey because it exists for no other purpose than to hold items and monsters. It's even opened up by a Zelda puzzle. Light all the torches, get a prize. There's also some flexile sentries in here. They are pretty tough, quite a bit tougher than the ones that we fought back in Shrine of Winter. That's the name of the area. I was going to say the place that leads up to Dragon Lake Castle, but that's sort of non-specific. Like most large enemies wherein staggering is impossible, the twin-blade form of the Santier's Spear is not particularly effective. It will do a lot of damage, of course, but it leaves you very open to counterattacks, and, you know, that's not optimal. You usually want to get out of the way of those. The sentries' attack patterns remain the same, no matter where you fight them. And as such, they're not particularly difficult once you switch to a more adequate weapon. I guess they really wanted to hide the garrison ward key. Why'd they want to do that? I don't know. Actually, I kinda do. I would actually recommend missing all of your poison knives, and then clearing out the second flexile sentry and all of the retainers before you take on the one that's hiding in the corner there. This way you have a lot more room to maneuver. At least, that is my appraisal of the fight. There's nothing bad about taking this one out first and just limiting your fight to that corridor, or even taking on two at once if you're feeling very brave. Either way, I think that 2 of these guys with so much health is a little overkill. 1 was probably enough. Excessive aggression is actually punished in this game, by the way. It fucks me up real bad. And all that really leads to is up here, where you've got a human effigy, and I guess access to the other retainers if you didn't want to take the secret door, or you were blind and didn't notice it. That does it for that little area. We will actually open up the Garrison Ward door in a later episode, and much fun will be had behind that door. Probably. Our final destination, at least for this video, lies near the end of our trek through the frozen Eleum Loyce. In this area, we had just acquired the Priestess's Eye, but we had not yet unfrozen the storm. So, there are a couple of things that we can get here that we could not before. This room is now much harder, because you will notice that some of those annoying golems are in the way. And given that these are ranged retainers that like to use their staves to cause havoc, it is very difficult to actually pry them away from those statues. I don't think I've ever been successful. So you just sort of have to bite the bullet and be prepared to fight a golem. Or two. Once more I end up putting warmth in an area where it benefits the enemies as well as me, but it actually turns out not to be a very big deal, simply because when it comes to an out-and-out slap fight, where you're just sort of duking it out, it's really hard to beat the Twin Blade Sentier Spear form. It's just got so much stagger on medium-sized enemies. Not a lot of choice but to simply lure things out here. Taking on that room just as is, Rambo style, will probably not end well for you unless you are extremely confident in your abilities. I am only fairly confident in my abilities. Now, unlike other larger enemies, these golems are actually slow enough that I feel like I can stay in Twin Blade form and simply use the strong attack to get through. If you maneuver behind them, they're actually really quite bad at covering that weakness. There's also some chests here that were previously inaccessible, and a very rudely placed mimic. To get the treasure, you have no choice but to kill the mimic and activate the golem. Fortunately, since the golem is pretty much on his own now, it is a much easier fight if you don't get stomped on for no reason. Something I tend to excel at. Now, our reward from that mimic is quite special. The symbol of avarice is a fairly infamous item that gives your head the appearance of a hungry mimic. It will continually drain your health, but it will also significantly increase item drop rate and soul acquisition. So it's quite powerful if you want to go on a farming expedition, but for, normal everyday use where you're fighting tough enemies and trying to get through an area, I would not recommend it. Also, I lost my bearings. I'm very smart. Now, this upcoming room was always fairly challenging, but now that it's frozen, this place is a complete pain in my ass. This is because there is a puzzle of sorts up here. You will notice that now that they're unfrozen, those golems are guarding a treasure chest. And because my greed knows no bounds, I must have it. So not only do I have to take on these two spiky crystal soldiers, I have to kill them in close proximity to the golems. Taking on two at once to begin with is sort of a tall order, but having to do it in such a way that immediately puts you in more danger the minute you're done, well, it's a bit of a difficulty. Oh boy. Once you've awakened a golem and a crystal soldier, you're pretty much required to kite them down here. Try and get them away from each other at least a little bit. They're big and slow and stupid, but the golems hit really hard. Well, actually, it's not fair of me to call them stupid. I don't really think they have intelligence as such. So naturally, that's not the side of the chest that we can open. So we're still not done with our rock gardening activities. Now I do something very foolish here. After temporarily leading them away from the area and getting some damage in, I eventually end up rubbing my body along the chest and seeing that, yes, there is in fact an open prompt there. So I think that I'm scot-free. I think that I have got the chest, everything is open, I just need to kill these guys and then I can get my reward. However, it is important that you kill enough enemies that all three statues are activated. If you do not, despite the fact that it looks like you could open that chest, you cannot. Do not make the same mistake that I did and then suffer the consequences. Whoops. Sometimes switching weapons on the fly is really hard. The Helix Halberd is, all in all, probably the best weapon in my arsenal against these guys. If I can get a couple good thrusts in, then they'll be gone in no time. The two-handed twin blade of the Santir Spear does more damage overall, but this has much less opportunity cost. Speaking of opportunity cost, I now learn to my cost that I have fucked up. If you try to open up the chest this way, you sort of just shuffle around in place for a moment sheepishly. So, it's time to find a surrogate. Fortunately, I'm not completely out of luck. There are plenty of enemies down in this hallway. The challenge, of course, will be getting them towards where I need them to be. So it results as a ridiculous chain of activating one golem and getting it over to the next golem. Mostly because this icy soldier is simply not interested in following me. Not sure if it was a quirk of the AI or what, but at least in this instance, the golem was much more aggressive. It also has a lot more health, which allows for more poking, which tends to reset aggro tables. I thought I was going to luck out and simply have the golem sort of push the soldier where I needed him to be, but then he ended up sort of clipping through the model, and now I've got this unenviable task on my hand. Unfortunately, enemy leash ranges in Dark Souls 2 are a little severe, I guess. I decide that maybe what I can do is simply put myself between him and where he initially came from, and then it will simply go in the other direction, because it's in its sort of kite back phase, but it can't actually kite back. But then I end up on the other side of it anyway, because, you know, I can't just tank their attacks definitely on the bridge. I try a couple things in this little dance. I think the most success I had was simply baiting him into attacking me, and sort of chaining that into a bunch of follow-throughs, so that his attacks take him closer to the last golem. Because, as you can see, their attacks do have quite a bit of follow-through to them. So if they keep attacking forever, then they will eventually reach the area I need them to be. And this is just about close enough. There we go. And now we've just got one more to deal with, and the treasure is ours. Forgive me if I start to play impatiently. Well, that was an ordeal. Also gonna show off the repair magic. Pretty handy. Doesn't burn through a fairly expensive repair powder. Doesn't require that much intelligence either. Our ultimate reward for that fiasco is the Curved Nil Greatsword. The Curved Nil Greatsword is a, unsurprisingly, curved greatsword in the same vein of the Murakumo, and is apparently a forbidden weapon that was sealed away by the Ivory King. What makes it so dangerous, I don't know. But it's a bit too much strength for us at the time being. It actually has a hidden function that I might as well just explain now. The flavor text mentioned that the farther the user has traveled, the more powerful the weapon becomes. The Curved Nil Greatsword actually gets stronger each New Game Plus cycle you take it through. It's sort of an odd mechanic. But, on the other hand, if you end up doing a lot of New Game Plus cycles, it's potentially the strongest weapon in the game. I'm not sure if it even has a cap of how many cycles you can take it through. It's sort of all academic, because I don't think many people have the patience to take it to its full potential. Either way, the real prize here was the Loyce Knight. That's all of them retrieved, I guess. I don't want to say rescued, because they seem more or less fine. Unlike the one in the cave, this illusory wall is quite dastardly and can be easily passed by. It leads to a couple more hidden items. Including a fairly tough fight with 2 rampart golems at once. So much for my backstab. I might have to kite this one out. Loyce is a really tough area, at least for me. One of the harder parts of the game, in my opinion. Rounding out the clutch ring set, we get the fire clutch ring. This does the same thing as all the other rings that have clutch in their name. Increases fire damage at the expense of your defense. Actually, a ring we could probably get some use out of, simply because we end up using pyromancy a lot. Still, a risky pick in most situations. I believe I misspoke earlier. I think I might have been under the impression that ring didn't exist. and I might have spoken out of turn. I can't remember exactly if I did say that or if I simply thought it, but if I did, I apologize and I offer a retraction. Hypothetically. Could always use some more of those, especially going through here. Now, there's one more treasure here that's a little obtuse, I would say. Before I make that jump, I just want to be absolutely sure that I did not miss another illusionary wall here, because I don't actually remember this area all that well. By the time I get here in most of my playthroughs, I tend to fly into a rage. But, for better or for worse, I do remember this is in fact the way to go. One more spiky ice soldier, which are quite frankly wrecked by the Helix Halberd, if you have the durability to use it, which you probably won't since this area is so long. And in this chest, our last prize. The twin-headed great bow. The DLC is fairly good about providing you great bows, where in the main game is sort of like farm along captains or get fucked. The twin-headed great bow requires 45 strength to wield, which I think works out to more like 24, depending on the formula. I can't quite remember. Either way, it's too much for us to wield, and I would definitely buy that thing is meant mostly for intimidation. It's kind of ridiculous. Since we've got a minute, I'll also show off the curved mill greatsword, which we actually can use in two hands. It looks pretty cool, I guess. It has a unique moveset that sends you spinning. It's a very spinny sword. Unlike the Murakumo, which actually has a sort of heavy, slow parry animation to it that's kind of ridiculous, but is also really cool when you pull it off. Either way, that's enough admiring ourselves. It's time to take a break.